Good. And then let's talk about the book because obviously that's new and having worked with you and seen the sort of impact that you can have on people, I was like, oh, this is great. Gav was like downloading his thoughts into a book, it's gonna help loads of people. But like what was the drive? Like not I guess everyone would like to write a book. Like, I would love to write a book about
Yeah.
executive health and everything, but there's a lot of work goes into it, and then there's a lot of demands on your time, and there's getting the thoughts which you can easily talk about, probably getting them out onto the paper in a way that makes sense, and so many edits and different things. Like, what made you want to go through all that, mate? Despite all the knowledge you got
Well,
there.
I was naive. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be, first of all. I thought, oh yeah, I'll just write this thing and it'll be easy and it'll be fun and then we'll have a book. And it was like, nope, that's not the case. So, um, I mean, it truly is a labor of love. I mean, you truly do have to be really excited to share your stories because if the writing part isn't fun, nothing else is going to be fun. Like
Mm.
seriously, because the rest of the parts are tough. And now for me, I had just, and I had all these stories from like my hockey world and just like this massive shift that I made. Like, as you know, like I used to be the guy who would have made fun of the mindset guy, like five,
Sure.
6 years ago, I would have been making fun of me,
Yeah.
the guy that I am now. So, I had this big shift and I really just kind of like wanted to get the stories and the thoughts on paper. And then what I realized as I was writing it, I was like, okay, I actually think I have something here in terms of like a legitimate arc of a book. And so that was kind of the idea for it was to use some of these stories, got some cool hockey stories and things like that to show people the value of looking internally. Really, at the end of the day, all of the times that I was punched in the face by life, so to speak, was because I wasn't internally aware. I wasn't aware of what was going on in my emotional state. I wasn't aware of the surroundings around me and like where things were headed. I was just kind of like barreling through and I was kind of like unconsciously living life. And I think a lot of people will do that and then they'll kind of wonder why things aren't working or they'll wonder why they're not where they want to be. But the reality is you're not where you want to be because you're living unconsciously. Like
Mm.
you're not you're not curious about anything, you're not digging into where you may be limiting yourself. Like at the end of the day, we are all limiting ourselves. Like the only reason we aren't where we want to be is because we're limiting ourselves in some way. Our job, I honestly think our job here is to figure that out, figure out where we're limiting ourselves and kind of get mastery over ourselves and mastery over our minds. Um, so, it took me 2 months to write this thing, like the bulk of it, and it took me 2 years to edit it and publish it. Like
Wow.
that was the toughest part. Because I'm not a writer. Like I wasn't a writer at the time. So lots of editing, lots of like, and I pulled a lot of stuff out. Um, and then I shifted some things around, studied a lot of people, studied a lot of really good books and shifted some things around. But yeah, it is like for anybody who's considering writing a book, it's a double-sided coin. It's a really tough process that like you're going to be frustrated at the like I'm not making much money on each book and
Mm.
it's not a cheap process to publish a book. But at the same time, what I have now is I have a physical asset that will stay with the world long after I'm gone. And I think that's pretty cool. I think about my son now, he can read these stories,
Mm.
from like an objective, somewhat objective perspective, like he can read them for himself. And, I think that's pretty cool. So and not to mention the fact that this is now a marketing asset for me. I've got the quote unquote leave behinds. I've got, things that can help me get speaking gigs and talk to groups and things like that, get on podcasts like this. So there is a lot of positives to it, but if you're writing a book because you want to make a boatload of money on the book, don't write the book. But if you want
Sure.
this asset and if you want some opportunities that come from it, it's a tough thing to do, but it's a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, especially when you get on the New York Times or Wall Street bestseller list, then, right? Once you can say that,
You're
that's
you're gonna help me do that, right, Oren?
yeah, I'll do my best, man. You never know, the whole 10 people who listen to this podcast might all buy a copy. No, that's awesome, mate. I'm actually really excited. I know that there's going to be that product ready to pre-order and everything in the next few days, and probably by the time we put this up, I'll have the link in the bio for that, mate. So I'm looking forward to getting my
Yep.
own copy. But um, who, I guess, who is the book best suited for is probably a good question, mate. Like, is it something that
Yeah.
if I left a copy lying around the house, my wife could pick up or my parents could pick up, and there'll be lessons in there, or is it for like the entrepreneur, like executive sort of person? Like, is there lessons for everyone, or is it very defined?
It's such a good question because I had such a tough time. I still have a tough time with, I've called it Consciouspreneur. And the reason I did that is because similar to like Freakonomics,
Oh
I
yeah,
wanted to I wanted to like make up a word and like own it. I had a couple people help me out and they said, hey, you should like have a word that like you now own that, So, so I did that. But that being said, I mean, I hope that athletes read this book. I hope that, executives read this book because the book is for high performers, like straight up. It's for anybody who wants to win at life, right? Maybe they've been an athlete before, or maybe they were like a really high performing student, or they're really high, they're high achievers. That's who it's for because what you're going to realize as you're reading it is like these principles relate to anybody who, again, wants to win. And you're sitting there going, why am I not winning? Or why am I not winning at the level that I want to? That shift comes from looking internally, comes from becoming more conscious. Now, I like consciouspreneur because I think a lot of people are, becoming entrepreneurs. A lot of people are business owners, and a lot of the people I work with are entrepreneurs. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, I would imagine, I don't know your wife, but I would imagine if she walks by it and she reads some of the stories, she'll be fired up about it because I'm assuming if she's married to you, she's a high performer. So,
yeah, yeah. She does well, mate. So, but with that, you mentioned like the stories in there. So, are we talking about stories directly from when you work with clients? Is it stories as in, stories about you? Or is it like the type of book when you say stories, like, these books that like Robin Sharma writes, like the 5 a.m. Club, where there's like a whole story, like a novel, which takes you through the idea shift. Like when you say stories, what do you mean, mate?
yeah, I have always found that the best way to get a point across is to tell a story.
Hmm.
I am certainly not at the level of Robin Sharma yet, where I can like write like a full arc story. I would forget characters and stuff like that. But what I've done is I took a lot of my experiences from sports and working with clients to build out some of these stories. But essentially, it was like I tried to pull stories that would represent the idea I was trying to get across. A couple times I also like pulled stories of other high performers. Like there's a really great story about Arnold Schwarzenegger in there. I don't know Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've never coached him, but I wish. But there's a couple really cool stories in there about that kind of stuff. Most of the stories, I think probably simply because it is my first book, a lot of them are personal stories. But if you read Ryan Holiday's work,
Sure.
the Stoic work and things like that, he'll always have a character that kind of represents each chapter or each section of the book. And I think I did a pretty good job of kind of like working off of that and like having like, okay, here's the root story of like what you need to know, and this is why this story matters, or this is what I'm trying to get across. So the story is really, I mean, there's a couple really cool hockey stories in there, and I think it's more that in the moment, here's a lesson told through a story because that's how we connect as humans.
Yeah, sure, man. Sure. Looking forward to reading some of those, mate. Sounds awesome. So,
Thanks,
yeah,
brother.
that would be awesome. But we talked before we started the podcast about I think that was at least over a year ago, perhaps maybe even 18 months. And since then, you've worked with more organizations, more people directly, more high performers. So I'm going to ask you two questions. One is what's the similarity between all these high performers, do you think? Like what do they have going on, or what's that personality trait that allows them to be at a high level? And then after that, I'd like you to know like what's the one thing, or what's the like the holdbacks, what's stopping people from becoming their best version and becoming a high performer?
It's funny, the similarity that allows them to be at a high level is a bit of a double-edged sword, I feel. So I think that all high performers, like, I mean, look, I identify as this myself, but I think that all high performers in some way, shape, or form, there's a negative side to it, there's a dark side to it. Um, Generally, a lot of the clients that I work with, fitness coaches and things like that, and then when I'm working with their clients, it's, people who are looking to lose weight or get more fit or whatever. Um, they're often high performers because of the external feedback they got when they were younger,
Mm,
right? They, were good at sports and they got external feedback where, people like them because of that, or their parents gave them good feedback when they got good grades. And, they kind of just like grabbed onto that and were like, oh, I like this feeling of being accepted, being loved, all this stuff
mm,
from performing well. So now they've kind of tied their identity to performing well. Now, this works really well because we can kind of like use this energy to propel us forward and to do some real good in the world. And I actually feel, there's nothing wrong with kind of using that, leveraging that dark side, so to speak, as someone like Alex Hormozy speaks about a lot, is like kind of leveraging the dark side. But I also think that it gets a lot of people in trouble if they're not conscious, if they're not aware of what's going on. As long as we know that the driver and the kind of like the base driver of our success and of our drive is this kind of like darker energy of like, I want to be accepted and I want to perform, then we can use it. But if we're not aware of it, sometimes I'll go into these big events and I'll present to people. And I distinctly remember going into an event where there was like 100, online fitness coaches and some of them incredibly successful. And I could see as I was presenting that what was happening in their heads is they were realizing that they had built their entire lives and businesses on a house of cards, right? They had built it on this like revenge or trying to, look good for somebody. And you could tell they were like, oh shit. And they essentially just like shut down and avoided it because they knew that if they actually faced what I was talking about, that everything they would have to tear everything down because they had, like I said, they had built it on a house of cards. So I think it's a double-edged sword, but like the similarity is that these people seemingly have unlimited energy to try and compete and win, and I think that's great. But we need to harness the foundations upon where that energy is coming from. If it's always coming from, I want to prove you wrong, I want to get revenge, I want to like kind of win at all costs, that's going to stop working at some point. And that's why the subtitle of the book is What to Do When the Hard Work Stops Working. At some point, you can't just outwork it anymore. You have to figure out what is the driver and shift your main driver. I always like to talk about it like a campfire. So, I know you guys don't have a whole lot of campfires down in Australia, but if you're starting a campfire or even a fire in a fireplace, you start with like kindling and paper and you light the match. And that stuff, the reason you do that is because it burns quick, but it also burns out fast, right? And I liken that to the dark energy, the like revenge push. I want to win at all costs, all that, right? What we need to do is we need to layer on some of those bigger logs on top of the fire so that it can go for longer and stay hotter.
mm,
And that is more the like purpose driven, why we're here. the self mastery that we spoke about earlier, this like, I want to win because I want to become a better human and I want to leave a better legacy. That's kind of where we need to take it as high performers. So I guess that kind of answers also what's stopping them. But I think the biggest, I, along with that, I think the biggest thing that stops people from having the success they want is that get, they're so fixated on like success and winning and performing for some audience. I don't know what audience we think, maybe it's social media or our parents or whatever, that we forget to zoom out and look at everything as feedback, right?
Mm,
So we make a mistake, we fail, something doesn't go the way we want to. We spend so much time being angry and frustrated that that didn't work out the way we wanted to, that we're not actually learning from that failure or learning from that mistake. And it's a really tough thing as a winner or a high performer to accept the losses, to actually seek out the places where we've lost or failed or screwed up. But those are the places, everyone who says, "Oh, I really value growth and I want to educate myself." Growth and educating yourself in the real way sucks. It's
mm.
hard. It's a hard process. So I think that what's stopping a lot of people is that they're so hard driving that they forget to take a step back, to zoom out a little bit, and to look at the bigger picture and get objective about where they're at and what they need to learn.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And what about, we've all gone through phases, mate. And, people who are listening might be in one now. I could be in one now. You could be in one now. Who knows? We never know when people are in these. But like people who are high performers, who then they've got all the right personality traits. They want to be as conscious and obviously, better themselves as much as possible. But sometimes you just get in a funk, right? And you can kind of lose that drive for whatever reason. I'm not going to speculate as to what the reasons may be, but what do you think people need to do to get out of that funk? Like, if they do feel like they've been performing at a high level consistently for, say, a year or longer on a task, but suddenly then they just hit a bit of a dip, performance drops, they're not feeling the same, they're not as motivated, they're not as driven, maybe they're scrolling social media a bit more, or, you know, putting more time into, Netflix or whatever, mate, like
Yeah.
how do we get out of that funk then and get back to high performance, do you think?
I'm probably going to go a little more spiritual here for you. So we'll see
Go,
where
go
this
for it.
heads.
Just go for it, mate. Give me
But
all of you.
yeah, so there's really two aspects here, I think. The first, if we get into a funk is quite simple and logistical actually, which is like you've likely just fallen into habits that are no longer serving you. So if we can recognize those habits, we can probably do a better job at changing them. But the real question is we need to look at is, why have I fallen into these habits? Why is this happening? Maybe it's a change in life circumstance. Like it's pretty easy for me to just scroll on my phone while my baby's awake, in the middle of the night. Like it's
Sure.
pretty easy, right? But the question is, okay, why have I fallen into them? And generally, this is because of there's some sort of a fear, or there's something that some new level that we're bumping up against will often cause us to kind of fall into a bit of a funk, or as the general consensus is, the word is self-sabotage ourselves, right?
Mm,
And what happens when we're in that funk, or in that like, oh, I don't know what to do, I can't get out of this, is we're essentially repeating the same cycles, the same decision making cycles that are not serving us. And then we're wondering why these things keep happening. You've always heard people go, I don't know why this keeps happening. Well, it keeps happening because you're using the same old perspective to make decisions that you've always made, and you need to change that perspective. You need to change that belief, that kind of like deeper story that you're telling. We all have these narratives, or these stories, or these ways that our brain creates rules for the world and for the way things are. And we often just apply those to everything without thinking about it. This is why they're called unconscious, right? Because it's part of our
Sure.
subconscious brain that's applying these rules that no longer serve us. But if we're applying a rule like for example, one of my big ones was, in junior high, middle school, I didn't fit in. I wasn't a cool kid, and that hurt. That wasn't capital T trauma, but for me as a seventh grade kid, it was trauma, right? It was
Sure.
traumatic for me. So my brain created this rule that you have to do anything you can to fit in. You have to do whatever you can, and that included people pleasing, and that included, being careful not to be too out there with the things I said, so that everybody will like me. Well, that served me really well through high school because everybody liked me. That, yeah, Gavin, yeah, he's a good guy. But as I get into business, as I get into marketing, as I get into, wanting to become extraordinary at something, well, the very definition of fitting in is that I'm ordinary, that I'm
Mm.
normal. I don't want to fit in. I don't want to be normal. So I had to change my story and change my perspective on that so that I could step out and become abnormal, become extraordinary. And when I'm doing that, I bump up against a lot of fears, a lot of like, oh, that feels uncomfortable. Oh, I don't want to do that. And that's when it's really easy to slip back into old patterns. Um, and really, that's all it is. It's just patterns and habits that we need to go a little deeper and figure out why is this happening, which again comes back to getting curious and asking yourself questions about what's going on in your brain and what's going on in your mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah. And one thing you mentioned there, Gav, was fear. And sometimes we see it, in the fitness world where it's sometimes like some people who don't sign up for coaching, like they might say they love the program and like, there's health issues and there's all sorts of things going on. And I'm like, when I look back on the data over the past 2 months, I'm like, oh yeah, who was that person? And then look at the notes. Oh, why did they not sign up? And I'm like, sometimes you can't place it, but sometimes I think it might be down to fear. Like even though they need the coaching and they like the product and they like that, they're either one not just aware of how much pain they're in and how much damage they could be doing, but also potentially the fear of, well, what if I take this step? What if I do that? What if I do become better and I then have a new standard and I don't have the excuses anymore. Like is that what you mean by fear in terms of reaching a higher level as well?
100%. There's a great quote. I think it's originally someone named Kathy Overman, and it's been popularized by Dr. Joe Dispenza that says our nervous system or our subconscious brain, however you want to call it, basically the system inside of us will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. So even though this person that didn't sign up knows that on the other side of this hard work and on the other side of signing up is a heaven that they want. And a lot of people will do this just when they set goals, even, goals that are this like unfamiliar heaven, they're unknown, right? That's scary for your subconscious brain. That's scary for your nervous system because it's unknown. So
Mm,
what we'll do is we'll default back to what we call the familiar hell, which is the same patterns and the same frustrating things over and over and over again. And this is, I think, what keeps people from making the jump is that it's not even that there's not enough pain because the pain is there. It's not even that they're not aware of their pain. It's that there's just this thing that's just too scary for them to make the leap because of, call it fear of success, call it whatever you want, but it's really just fear of the unknown, of change,
mm,
of something
sure.
new, something different that keeps us, and this is exactly that, like keeps us in these perpetual patterns that frustrate us to no end. We're constantly asking, why is this happening? And why it's happening is because we're not willing to do the scary thing, right? And I've heard it recently said the transformation happens in the transaction, right? Like
Sure.
like when you make the commitment to work with Odhran or you make the commitment to work with a business coach or whatever, 90% of the transformation happens just by you making that difficult decision because now you've said, I'm willing to step into the unknown and I'm willing
Mm,
to put skin in the game to help me step into the unknown. And every time, like I hate it so much because I'm like a prairie Canadian kid, but every time that I put big money down and put big skin in the game for anything, regardless of if like I've gotten the exact results I've wanted, I've changed in a major way. And that's
mm,
really what we're here for is changing and growing in a major way, as uncomfortable as it is and as much as it sucks. It's just the way we are as humans.
mm. Sure, sure. And with that, you're talking about that fear of the unknown. So, say if we take two people and they both got this, the fear, like, whether it's a business coach, a mindset coach, fitness coach, doesn't really matter. But say they love the presentation, they love everything that the person sells, and they both get that fear. Is there anything that separates the person who might be able to push that fear aside and say, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. What's the worst that could happen? Despite knowing that there's the fear there, oh, I'm a bit uncertain, let me think about it. But then they come back and they say, I'm in, right? Versus the person who says, oh, let me think about it, and they never come back. Like, what allows one person to dive in despite the fear versus one person who lets it hold them back?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. I actually think that one of the major factors is the external, the environment that they're in. I know for me, it's a lot easier for me to do something hard and scary when my wife's like, you know what, I think you should do it. Like I
Sure.
think that's helpful, right? Versus I know a lot of people, a lot of women whose husbands are not on board with them. Like they're like, oh, you got to pay somebody to tell you not to drink Coke all day. Like, and that's not a helpful, that's, you need a relationship counselor, right? Like that's not, maybe you don't even need a fitness coach, right? But I think that so the environment is certainly helpful, but I think the difference there is this it's really just like a readiness, like a readiness and I don't even think people like this might not even be as much a mindset thing as it is just like this readiness to change. Like the pain is enough. There's the quote that goes around Instagram, right? If your pain is greater than if the pain you feel is like greater than the pleasure that you currently feel, like you'll make a change, right? And I think it's just like it's this readiness to and you kind of often hear it, right? People are like, screw it, I'll do it, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
kind of like screw the fear, screw the like all the other stuff, because you know, there's always going to be reasons to not do it. And I think a lot of times what we're doing with people, like when we're handling their objections and when you know, if you as the salesperson is trying to help somebody make a decision like this, um, you're just trying to change their decision making compass, right?
Mm,
And I think that a lot of times people's decision making compass is off because it's in fear mode, right? And so sometimes you just not even need to change the compass. You just need to throw the compass away and take a chance. Like if there's enough telling you that it's worthwhile to make a decision, you almost just need to throw that compass away. And yeah, I'll often say to people that overthinking, right? Like a lot of people will overthink the decision to make a change in their lives. Overthinking is really just under feeling. And a lot of us, could open up a whole new can of worms, but a lot of us just have no idea what we're actually feeling emotionally. And, anxiety and excitement are next door neighbors, right? They're just slightly different, right? It's basically just how we frame it. They're pretty much the same thing. So a lot of people may think they're feeling anxiety and it doesn't feel good and then they overthink it. But maybe if they dove in, they'd be like, no, I'm excited about this. It's just a feeling I haven't had in a long time and I'm not used to this feeling. Maybe I should lean on that and I should make this decision to put some skin in the game and change.
sure, sure. I Gav, like final one in terms of the books, then I want to talk about the dad stuff for a second. But we've talked about a lot of different things as just sort of questions, no script, just as it sort of came into my head of your thoughts around mindset stuff. What's one thing that if people do next week, they go on to pre-order the book, or they're listening back in 6 months and they think this sounds like a good book, what's one thing that they're going to learn from the book, do you think, that will really, really benefit them?
What I hope they learn from the book, number one, is to live life more intentionally, to whatever it is, to ask a lot of questions and recognize that everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, even being awake with a newborn in the middle of the night screaming, is a lesson, is something. There's something to teach you there.
Mm,
Because so many people just get so stuck in the emotions, get so stuck in the frustrations that they don't recognize that this is where the learning happens. The learning happens when things are uncomfortable. The learning happens when you have to ask different questions than you've asked before. And that's where, before I knew what I know, I was just floating through life unconsciously. And I think the difference between unconscious and conscious is just simply in asking questions of yourself, in digging in going internal instead of looking external for validation. So the hope is that if you pick up the book, or even if you don't pick up the book and you just listen to this, that you're going to live a more intentional life, an objective life where you ask a lot of questions of yourself and of what's going on around you.
brilliant, man. Brilliant. Love that. Love that. Let's take a 30-second break, mate, because I know you made a coffee before we started talking. I know you've barely drank any because I keep firing questions at you. So if you want to grab a quick drink, I'm going to grab a bit of water as well.
I appreciate it.
I know it's early your side, my friend, so I thought that man's probably touched his coffee. Okay, so let's get into fatherhood, mate. What do you feel is what's the biggest change in the past 2 months since you have become a father?
Yeah, the biggest change is the questions that I've been asking myself, and
Mm,
I'll explain. Um, our mutual connection, Craig talks about a lot about putting boundaries on your life and forcing your business to fit inside these boundaries. Like if you create a smaller box, you will figure out a way to fit everything inside of it, kind of thing. And I think that's what parenting or what becoming a new parent forces on you is you have less freedom, so to speak, less space. So there's more boundaries. And you also want to have more boundaries because, like, I want to spend more time with my wife and my son. So it forces you to ask different questions. And I think, I've been trying to impart this on my clients. I don't think you need to have a kid to make this change. Our brains are built to solve problems. 90% of the time, we're giving our brains shitty problems to solve. The business owner who says, how do I make more money? That's not a good problem to solve because your subconscious brain is going to immediately go to protect all the reasons why making money feels unsafe. you know, you have a belief that you're going to have to work really hard to make money and you're already working really hard. You have a belief that you're going to have to be overwhelmed to make money and you don't want to be overwhelmed. You have a belief that being wealthy makes you evil and you don't want to be evil. So your brain just immediately shoots to, well, we got to protect you from all these things, no matter what your goal is, right? You're trying to lose weight, right? And you want to lose weight and you say, how do I lose 20 pounds? But then your subconscious brain goes, well, people are going to see you differently if you lose 20 pounds. So that's unsafe. You're going to have to be in the gym for 4 hours a day, doing cardio, whatever the belief is. And the fact is that all of these things that I've just shared are inner narratives that are beliefs that are not facts, but they're assumptions that we make. So what I was forced to do was change the question I was asking. One of the things, I mean, we're on one now, but I've realized that I'm just straight up on too many Zoom calls, like more Zoom calls than I want to be on, because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, no matter how much time it takes, when I get off like 7, 8 Zoom calls, I don't have energy to be present with my family. So I
Gotcha.
recognize I'm on too many Zoom calls. So if I just ask, how do I make more money? My brain's going to go, well, the only way to make more money is to work with more clients and be on more Zoom calls. So I'm going to block you from making more money. Versus once I had Henry, I started asking this question. Essentially, it's like, how do I make more money, whatever number you're looking at making money, with less than 15 hours on Zoom every week.
Mm.
Well, now we're actually solving a better problem because it forces me to get creative and think about it differently. And I think that's what parenting really hit me with is you have to get creative and think outside the box about solving problems like when am I going to work out? How am I going to make money? Like, I mean, I have the joy of I don't have to make money in a certain way. I can
Mm.
figure out a different way to make money. But again, it's about asking the right questions. So I think a lot of times I've started coining this new saying that 90% of the problem is solved by defining the problem properly. And I think just so many people are kind of asking crappy questions of themselves.
Mm. Sure, sure. And how, like, I guess that question of how do I be more productive, and you're saying how can I make condense my time and fit everything in? I guess how have you managed to do, like, have you managed to come to a conclusion on that? Like, how do you get rid of the unnecessary meetings? Like, I appreciate the fact you thought this was necessary enough to show up today, mate, but like, all those Zoom meetings that a lot of people may take, especially if they're talking about executives, like there's probably hundreds of meetings that they don't need to be in each year that are robbing them of their time. They're maybe interrupting creative flow. How do you put a barrier like that in place? And how do you then, well, let's start with that. How do you then just put that barrier in place and just say, right, listen, I don't need to be at that meeting? Like, because that can be scary, especially if you are, maybe you're not the CEO, maybe you are reporting to somebody and you do have some demands there. Like, how do you put those barriers in place, mate? Whether you run your business or whether you're an employee.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you run your own business, the key here is like you need to make people play by your rules, right? And like I
Mm.
said, as much as this is somewhat inconvenient for me,
Of
I
course.
would rather flex in the morning.
Sure.
So I have a boundary that once basically 5 o'clock hits, I want to be with my family,
Sure.
right? 5 p.m. hits. So that's my boundary that I'm choosing to stick to. And I have no problem having a conversation with you or telling you why that's my boundary. In fact, I just had the opportunity to jump on this like really cool roundtable call on a Friday, but I have chosen to take Friday afternoons as family time.
Right.
And when he told me, he's like, yeah, so it's on this Friday. And I was like, okay, I'm willing to flex on that. And then he's like, yeah, we usually go for 2 to 2.5 hours. I was like, nope, I can't do that. So I emailed him and I said, look, I'm a new father and I've chosen to set this time with my wife and my son. So I'm unfortunately not going to be able to jump on that call. So like as an entrepreneur, we can play by our own rules, right? And we make
Sure.
people play by our rules. Now, if you don't quite have that freedom, a lot of people might be saying, well, that's great for you, but I don't have that freedom. I think the key here is communication. And the number one thing that I think a lot of people need to ask of their bosses and the people above them is, what do you think the value is of me being on this meeting?
Mm.
Is there value in me being on this meeting? Or, is there maybe more value in me being on the meeting for 20 minutes to say my piece and then leaving? Because in reality, there's even a few meetings that I'm on that I don't need to be on there for the full hour. I probably need
Sure.
to be on there for 10 minutes and then I can leave,
Mm.
right? Or I can just share my notes and I can not even be on the meeting at all. But I think that this all comes from communication. So over communicating things and letting people know, saying to your boss, hey, I totally understand that you want me to be on this meeting. But you know, this is what I'm thinking. I've got 6 other meetings or something like that. And based on what you're saying you want to get out of the meeting, I don't think that I'm a valuable part of this, or I don't think me being on there is going to add any value to the meeting. So therefore, I suggest that maybe I shouldn't be on the meeting. Like it's a communication thing and like an over communication thing. And I think this is where so many of us who grew up like in our generation tried to avoid confrontation. So a lot of us would
Mm.
see that as confrontation, and really it's just a disagreement of kind of values. And the best part about that is if we communicate well if we communicate well and communicate clearly and share our point of view, at least we're giving ourselves the opportunity to make a different decision. Now, our boss may say, "Screw you, no, beyond the meeting."
Sure.
But if we can communicate why we don't feel we need to be on that meeting, I think there's a lot of value there because, you know, it's not worthwhile for that boss to have you on the meeting if that's taking away from your productivity either. And that's the other piece is just like you and I, when we're selling something, we're trying to leverage what the person wants. Well, if you're trying to go in there and sell your boss on you not being on a meeting, leverage what they want. They want productivity out of you. So if you say, this is taking away from my productivity, this is taking away from my ability to deliver on other projects, they may just understand what you're saying enough to be like, huh, yeah, this actually might make them less productive.
Mm, sure.